Welcome to Hobbit Storytelling Hobbit, and today we are going to be reading the story. But first up, we are going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly. Then we are going to be reading The Hobbit, and this is chapter 6.
6.
Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss another video. Hi, Mom. Okay. And here is Heavy D.
Hello. We had some technical difficulties getting started, so our camera is a little off center, but I think we're okay now. All right, so this is Luke chapter 6. We've got sirens in the background. Luke chapter 6 is a long one, so get ready. Here it is. English Standard Version, here we go. On a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands.
Sit down. No, it's not okay. He's reading the Bible.
All right, we're going to start chapter 6 over once again. On a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. On another Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their thoughts. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." And he rose and stood there. And Jesus said to them, "I will ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it?" And after looking around at them all, he said to him, he said to him, woo, brain like light bulb, ding. He said to him, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. In these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles: Simon, whom he named Peter, and Andrew his brother, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon who was called the Zealot, and Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And he came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all the crowd sought to touch him, for power came out from him and healed them all. And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also, and from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your good, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use it, will be measured back to you. He also told them a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take out the log of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. That's the end of Luke chapter 6. I hope you're enjoying the reading of God's Word. Tomorrow we will continue with Luke chapter 7. So, obviously it's been a few days since we've been reading The Hobbit. We have a synopsis. Basically, The Hobbit, Mr. Bilbo, he, of course, was knocked out, and Fili, the dwarf, I think, he fell off of his back or something, and then he was knocked out. He was in the dark. He came across something, I think it was like a necklace or something, and then he found this really, really nice gentleman called Gollum that said, "Oh, let me show you the way out." I think I'm getting it wrong. Just a minute. Let Kimberly tell you.
Is that what Gollum said?
I think he keeps doing it wrong to get me to do it. So, JJ, so what really happened is, love your light bulb, Mom? So what actually happened is, Bilbo did get, knocked off of that guy's back. You see, he was too slow to run with the dwarves, so they would take turns holding him so that he could, keep up with them and wouldn't get separated. And then that backfired. They got separated. What happened was the orcs, they're orcs, right? Yeah, they're orcs.
No, they're goblins.
No, I think
They're goblins.
goblins
They're
or
goblins in
orcs.
this book, they're orcs in the next book.
Okay, whichever one they are.
Doesn't matter.
They
They're
sent,
bad guys.
yeah, the bad guys.
Ugly
then.
bad guys.
They
Like
sent.
to eat dwarves.
They like to eat dwarves
Okay.
and hate the sunlight.
Okay, can I do the synopsis? So they sent their sneakiest people to go ahead and do a surprise attack, and then I keep wanting to say Frodo, but it's Bilbo. Bilbo got knocked off of the dwarves' back, and then fell into a really deep cave that not even I'm gonna call them goblins. The goblins knew about. And then he found a ring in this cave. And so he takes the ring, he doesn't put it on, he puts it in his pocket. Then he finds a thing called Gollum. And Gollum,
A thing?
well, we don't know what kind of thing he is. He could, for all we know, be...
Okay, alright, just keep
Okay.
going.
But in the movies,
Dang.
So what happens is, Gollum challenges Bilbo to a question battle. Basically,
Riddles.
okay, a riddle battle. Basically, they ask each other riddles, and the person who can't answer the riddle loses. And Bill-
what happens if he loses?
well,
Bilbo
the
loses, he
terms
dies.
were, if Bilbo loses, then he gets eaten, and if Gollum loses, he shows the way to the exit. So what happened was, Bilbo, he won, except by, let's say a question that was not exactly
in my
within the
pocket?
rules.
What
Yeah.
is in
Okay, guys, let Kimberly tell it, please.
And then, Gollum, he can't answer the question. So, he's like, yes, I'm gonna go and grab some stuff from in the lake. He had an island in the lake, but Bilbo didn't know that. And, then what happened was, he goes out into the lake and searches for the ring. Which we get some backstory. Apparently it was his birthday present. Don't know where he got it from though. And it turns you invisible when you wear it. Look how nicely they are following the story. And so what happens is he can't find it. Then he realizes he must have dropped it when he came back recently
When he went
from
to go eat that last goblin.
yeah, from eating the last goblin. And then what happened was he goes through the lake, and at this point Bilbo he had started running when Gollum came. And then 'cause he knew something was up. And then what happened was he put on the ring, disappears, and then Gollum literally runs right past him, like this far away.
He's like,
Okay.
And then Gollum's like, he must have put on the ring. I can't find him now. So he
Okay, Daniel.
he goes over to guard the exit. And then what happens is Bilbo, he follows him. And then he manages to get past him with Gollum chasing him. And then he runs to a little bit of sunlight that he sees. and finds that there is a door. So he goes over to the door, only to be greeted by a lot of goblins. And then he puts on the ring again, and then he disappears, and then he goes through the door, and the goblins are like, "Hey, look at that! The door's open. That little guy must have gone through the door." So they go through the door, and that's about where we left off, right?
Wait. They also saw his shadow.
Oh yeah, they also saw his shadow. That's another thing. The ring will make you completely invisible, except in broad daylight you can see just a little bit of the shadow. And I'm gonna hand it off to Dad, and let's see if Bilbo can find his way to the rest of the dwarves.
Okay, yeah. Hi there. So at this time, I'd like to put in another plug for... We've got Mom and who else?
Rebecca.
One other person, Rebecca probably. So after this live stream, beginning tomorrow, I'm going to begin reading the Gospel account. This is a Harmony of the Gospels by Lorraine Boatner. I'm going to be posting this on my Alpha Omega site on YouTube, but I will be live streaming it right here on Heavy D Storytelling on Facebook, so don't let that be confusing to you. So, can I have my mask back, please? Thank you. All right, today I'm going to be reading with a mask on. Just kidding. All right. No, really. All right. So, and Kimberly has left us.
You have your mouth.
So we're... Can we stop swinging my mask around, please? Okay, we have some restlessness issues today.
Get set up.
All right, so this is chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. We are going to begin right now. Excuse me, and I breathe in and get some saliva in the back of my mouth, so... Sorry about that. What?
Where's your water bottle?
It's right here. I'm good. All right. Out of the frying pan into the fire, take 2. We're going to begin right now, chapter 6. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He was lost. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on and on till the sun began to sink westward behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward and could see before him only ridges and slopes falling toward lowlands and plains glimpsed occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I seem to have gotten right on to the other side of the misty mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where, oh, where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I only hope to goodness they are not still back there in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on out of the little high valley over its edge and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now that he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding downwards with a rocky wall on the left hand. On the other side the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of these dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw, peering between 2 big boulders, a head with a red hood on it. It was Balin, doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. I will give them all a surprise, he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on with their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," said the wizard, "and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him." The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense. "He has been more trouble than use to us so far," said one. "If we had not got to go back now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say." Gandalf answered angrily. By the way, it does actually say drat him, not, any colloquialism. Gandalf answered angrily, "I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and leave you here and get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over. Whatever did you want to go and drop him for, Dory?" Oh, I guess it was Dory that dropped him. "You would have dropped him," said Dory, "if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark, tripped up your feet, and kicked you in the back. Then why did you not pick him up again? Good heavens! Can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glamdring, and Thorin was stabbing here and there everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everybody,' and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you quite well know, till we had dashed through the gate guards and out of the lower door and helter-skelter down here. And here we are without the burglar. Confusticate him. And here's the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them and slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped. Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was as astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin, who told him what he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, that just crept along, very carefully and quietly." Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted, said Balin, "and I take off my hood to you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about finding the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddles competition and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. And then I couldn't think of any other questions with him sitting beside me, ended Bilbo. So I said, "What's in my pocket?" And he couldn't guess in 3 goes. So I said, "What about your promise? Show me the way out." But he came at me to kill me, and I ran and fell over, and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him, because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, and so he was making for it. And then he sat down in the entrance, and I could not get by, so I jumped over him and escaped and ran down to the gate. "What about the guards?" they asked. "Weren't there any?" "Oh, yes, lots of them, but I dodged him, and I got stuck in the door, which was only open a crack, and I lost lots of buttons," he said sadly, looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and here I am." The dwarves looked at him with quite a new respect when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through, as if it was not very difficult or very alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the hobbit wondered if he guessed as the part of his tale that he had left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained it all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not yet heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they had all got to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once, so now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountain. But their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easy to travel by, so they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up until now. "I must see if I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all." As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realized what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nipped inside the crack. Just as it snapped to, he followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows. "A very ticklish business it was," he said, "touch and go, but of course Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction. "They made that gate ages ago," he said, "partly for a way of escape if they needed one, partly as a way out in the lands beyond, where they still come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubly after this," he laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped, so they might be said to have had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. "We must be getting on at once, now we are a little rested," he said. "They will be out after us in hundreds when the night comes on, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by." "Oh, yes," he said in Did I skip a page? To steer by. "Oh, yes," he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. "You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and come right down through the heart of the mountains and are now on the other side, quite a shortcut. But we are not at the point to which our pass would have brought us. We are too far up to the north, and have some awkward country ahead, and we are still pretty high up. Let's get on." "I'm dreadfully hungry," groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit. His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly now that the excitement was over. Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage. No, thank you, said Bilbo. Very well, then, we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves. As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and, of course, there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared, the bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with a dust and a noise. Before long the whole slope above them and below them seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in a fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, crackling slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that here stood right up to the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forests of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little Hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of rocks. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and pine roots far below. Well, that has got us on a bit, said Gandalf, and even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly. I dare say, grumbled Bombur, but they won't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down to our heads. The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy, and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. Nonsense! We are going to turn aside here out of the path of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light. The sun had long gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them. Though far away, through the trees and over the black tops of those growing lower down, they could still see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able down the gentle slopes of a pine forest in a slanting path leading stealthily southward. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken with tall fronds rising right above the hobbit's head. At times they were marching along quiet as quiet over a floor of pine needles, and all the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the trees. Must we go any further? Asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that he could only just see Thorin's beard wagging beside him, and so quiet that he could hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack. A bit further, said Gandalf, and what seemed ages further, after what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden, they heard a howl away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another away to the right, and a good deal nearer to them, then by another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins' hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him often enough in tales. One of his elder cousins on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild, on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see you to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he said, and it became a proverb, though we now say out of the frying pan into the fire, in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. "Up the trees, quick!" cried Gandalf, and they ran to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low, or were slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as ever they could, you can guess, and up they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarves sitting up in the trees with their beards dangling down like old gentlemen gone cracked and playing as being boys. Feely and Keely were at the top of a tall larch like an enormous Christmas tree. Dory, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Glowin were more comfortable in a huge pine with regular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Beaver, Bofer, Bomber, and Thorin were in another. Dwellin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir with few branches, and were trying to find a place to sit in the greenery of the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a good deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the very edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo? He could not get into any tree, and he was scuttling about from trunk to trunk like a rabbit that had lost its hole and has a dog after it. "You've left the burglar behind again," said Nori to Dory, looking down. "I can't always be carrying burglars on my back," said Dory, "down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?" "He'll be eaten if you don't do something," said Thorin, for there were howls all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dory," he called, for Dory was lowest down in the easiest tree, "be quick and give Mr. Baggin a hand up." Dory was really a decent fellow in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far as ever he could. So Dory actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment the wolves trotted, howling, into the clearing. All of a sudden there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself. Only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up, and nearly got him. In a minute there was a whole pack of them, yelping all around the tree, and leaping up at the trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so these evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named, cannot climb trees. For a time they were safe. Luckily it was warm and not windy. Trees are not very comfortable to sit in for long at a time, but in the cold and the wind, with wolves all around below waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. This glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place of the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree in which Dory and Bilbo were, and then went snuffling about till they had smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. These they guarded too, while all the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade, and in the middle of the circle was a great grey wolf. He spoke to them in a dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, but it sounded terrible to him, and as if all their talk was about cruel and wicked things, as it was. Every now and then all the wargs in the circle would answer their grey chief all together, and their dreadful clamour almost made the Hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I will tell you what Gandalf heard, though Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains, unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes, or are marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they often got the wargs to help and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Now it seemed that a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live in among the more pleasant woods in the valleys and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dare not attack them if there were many together or in the bright day. But now they had planned, with the goblins' help, to come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there next day. All would have been killed except the few goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because of the brave woodmen and their wives and children, but also because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their very meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodmen, and were come to spy on them, and would take news of the plans down into the valleys, and then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle, instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly from their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up the trees escape, at any rate not until morning, and long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains, and goblins can climb trees or cut them down. Now you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growls and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel that they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have their own way, though he could not do very much, stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree, then he set one alight with a bright blue fire and threw it whizzing down among the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately its shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. They burst on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in colored sparks and smoke. A specially large one hit the chief wolf in the nose, and he leapt in the air 10 feet, and then rushed round and round the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most horribly and uncanny fire. If a spark got on their coats, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs, while those that were burning were running and howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled off down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on the top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leapt up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down upon the ring of wargs, a tiny spot far, far below. But eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking, and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So, though he could not see the people in the forest, he could make out the commotion among the wolves, and see the tiny flashes of fire, and hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see the glint in the moon on goblin spears and helmets, as long lines of wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves, and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of the Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot. So he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains, and slowly, circling ever round and round, they came down, 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 toward the ring of the wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. A very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set it alight in several places. It was high summer, and on this eastern side of the mountains there had been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, fallen branches, deep-piled pine needles, and here and there dead trees were soon in flames. All round the clearing of the wargs fire was leaping, but the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling round the trunks, and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out, and their eyes shining as red and fierce as the flames. Then suddenly goblins came running up, yelling. They thought a battle with the woodmen was going on, but they soon learned what had really happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and they soon had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood round the tree trunks. Others rushed round and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves, a ring which they kept from spreading outwards, but it closed slowly in till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and through the reek he could see the goblins dancing round and round in a circle, like a people round a midsummer bonfire. Outside the ring of dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectful distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds in fir trees, their feathers were fanned in fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast 'em alive or stew 'em in a pot. Fry 'em, boil 'em, and eat them hot. Then they stopped and shouted out, "Fly away, little birds, fly away if you can. Come down, little birds, or you will get roasted in your nests." "Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing?" "Go away, little boys," shouted Gandalf in answer. "It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry, and to show them he was not frightened of them enough, though of course he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing. Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch, to light the night for our delight, yah-hey! Bake and toast 'em, fry and roast 'em, till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black, and cinders lie beneath the sky, so dwarves shall die, and light the night for our delight, yah-hey, yah-harry-hey, yah-hey! And with that last yah-hey, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment it spread to the others. The bark caught fire, the lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high, right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he would probably have killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt, but he never leapt. Excuse me. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth, the goblins yelled and stomped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles, the dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor, or drove them far away. Their talons tore at goblin faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up now as far as they ever dared to go. Poor little Bilbo was very nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs as Dory was borne off last of all, and up they went together above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air with his arms nearly breaking. Now, far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide. In the wolves, a few eagles were still circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames above the trees sprang suddenly up above the highest branches. They went up in crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below them, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising all the time in strong, sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight, clinging onto Dory's ankles. He moaned, "My arms, my arms!" But Dory groaned, "My poor legs, my poor legs!" At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and he had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down between his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. I'm going to show you the picture here. The caption says, "The misty mountains looking west from the Eyrie towards Goblin Gate." And this is the picture right here. This is, of course, from the book, which means that it is Mr. Tolkien's own artwork. All right. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him. Just before his arms gave way, he loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell onto the rough platform of an eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire and fear lest he fall off that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by this time after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days, with next to nothing to eat, and he found himself saying aloud, "Now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf." "No, you don't," he heard Dory answering, "because the bacon knows that it will get back in the pan sooner or later, and it is to be hoped we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks." "Oh, no, not a bit like storks. Forks, I mean," said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, and if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit, and are up in his eyrie at night. The eagle only sharpened his beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers and took no notice. Soon another eagle flew up. "The Lord of the Eagles bids you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf," he cried, and was off again. The other seized Dory in his claws and flew away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners, and to begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came. The eagle came back, seized him in his talons by the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on the wide shelf of rock on the mountain side. There was no path down onto it save by flying, and no path down off it except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles also was there, and was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So, you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men lived. They would shoot us with their great bows of yew, he said, for they would think we were after their sheep, and at other times they would be right. No, we are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and glad to repay over our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the southward plains. Very well, said Gandalf. Take us where and as far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime we are famished with hunger. I am nearly dead of it, said Bilbo, in a weak little voice that nobody heard. That can perhaps be mended, said the Lord of the Eagles. Later on you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rock, and the figures of the dwarves round it, cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Owen and Glóin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches even yet. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though he really would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than ever he had done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamt of his own house, and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find, nor remember what it looked like. That is the end of chapter 6. Tomorrow we will read chapter 7, which is called Queer Lodgings, and the first word is the.
One more chapter.
No, Daniel. We're done. All right. Chapter 7 is once again called Queer Lodgings. The first word is the. And if you are thinking about the. If you're thinking about the Bible reading that I'm going to be doing afterwards, will begin tomorrow. It's the, if I say it's the, by the way.
The next.
So that's going to start tomorrow, and what we're going to do is we're going to wait like 5 or 10 minutes till the kids are settled in their rooms, and then I'm going to read, and it'll be probably like a minute or two each. So that's the plan. All right. So I hope that you're enjoying the reading of The Hobbit. It looks like we have an art gallery coming. Here is Kimberly.
I drew this today during the live stream.
Oh, that's really nice.
I know Becca does a lot better, but I think it's pretty cool.
All right. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and... Oh, we've got another art gallery coming.
Daniel actually did
Here we
make.
go. Here's Daniel's.
I have another thing that Daniel made.
All right, Daniel, Kimberly.
Captain Rex.
All right, good night,
I have
Rebecca.
something that Daniel made.
Oh, okay. All right. So
Lamborghini.
good night. We will
Wait.
see you.
Okay, show and tell is over.
Okay, show and tell's over. All right, good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.